Not good! A male student ran in with a panicked expression while the student outside shouted, waking up the few people in the room. What's wrong? Tell me slowly, Zick. Their faces were cold as they waited for Zick Sunders to speak. He panted heavily and quickly said, Lara and a few other female students drank tap water and are now unconscious. Furthermore, they have a high fever and are vomiting. Miranda was speechless. She'd already warned them, but she didn't expect to encounter such a thing. Why were these people not on guard at all? Immediately, Alice took the initiative, following this male classmate and Miranda. She had just recovered a lot of medicinal spiritual strength. After this torment, she had used up a little more. The virus in the water could be removed, but Alice was helpless due to her high fever. Lara and the others were all dispirited and dejected, so they helped them back to the classroom and put them down. Miranda looked at the time. It was already around 11 o'clock, but the sky was gray. The moon was still high in the sky, and the sun seemed to have disappeared. A wave of dark cloud streaked past, obscuring the moonlight. The starlight was also gone. Not a single one lit up. A crow-like cry suddenly sounded above everyone's heads, and the sound of rushing wind followed. In the darkness, they couldn't clearly see what was coming. Swordlight slash! Miranda had long been prepared, and the brilliant light from the sword lit up the room. Suddenly, everyone could clearly see the strange beasts that were attacking them this time. The monsters looked like crows. They had bodies that were completely black, and they were half the size of a person. There were many of them, baring their razor-sharp teeth and opening their mouths menacingly. They let out piercing cries and knocked against the window and wooden boards. 20 of these crows flew in from nowhere, diving into the crowd. Ah! Screamed the students. They didn't even have time to react before their lives were reaped by these monsters. The rest hurriedly ran outside. Miranda wouldn't let these monsters kill again, so she began blasting sword rays at them one after another. There were several sword rays, but only the two closest to her managed to hit them successfully. The monsters were extremely fast, but they weren't quite as strong as some of the other creatures they'd encountered. Even though they attacked the other students, they only left a small wound on their bodies. Dale, who had switched classes with Denny outside, hurriedly rushed over with his classmates, his reaction swift. The earth rock spike immediately rose with a swoosh. The two medicinal strange beasts fell to the ground and immediately turned into a wisp of black smoke, dissipating immediately. Alice also joined the battle, shooting out water blades and cones, which didn't seem to have any effect whatsoever. Students, don't panic. These things' attacks are weak. Quickly organize a counterattack. Miranda had already formulated a game plan, but it was difficult to get everyone on the same page. After she'd reminded them, some of the male students recovered from their shock and attempted to block the strange beasts' attacks. At the same time, they attempted to grab them or resist. The effect wasn't bad. Although there were still people who were injured one after another, a few robust male students successfully fought back the crows, knocking them down and crushing them underfoot. The first wave of resistance was effective, so the students weren't as flustered as before. After a few waves, they forced the crows into a desperate situation. Only a few of them were running around in the classroom. The window was broken, and the crows outside poured in, screeching en route. The current group of strange beasts wasn't the same as the others that had split up earlier, and there were probably even more on their way. The male students who were assigned weapons stood in front of them, and with a wave of their hands, sent a few crows flying. However, the crows didn't fear death and continued to charge forward. Naturally, Miranda and Dale didn't stand on the sidelines and watch either. Swordlights slashed out and the thorns on the ground protruded. Countless crows suddenly turned into thick black smoke. The black smoke seemed to have dissipated, but in reality, above them, a mass of black gas was condensing. As more and more crows died, the mass of black gas became larger and larger. The monsters had actually lost their intelligence a long time ago, and were being controlled by an invisible force in the darkness to die on purpose. The rites belonged to sacrifices. Miranda and Dale didn't know about it and were crazily harvesting the crows. If Charles had been there, he would have stopped them a long time ago. The sacrifice, which was actually to increase the energy of the final boss, could most effectively be done by burning Zack or Calvin to ashes. The soul essence and evil aura that had turned into black energy would be completely burned, where Calvin's natural and sacred holy light would completely purify it and disappear from the world. However, it was impossible. This was the first time Miranda and the others had fought these monsters, so it wasn't easy to gain an advantage against them. The students had been holding their breath for a long time, and at this moment released their energy crazily, in perfect sync. Amidst a wild commotion, the flock of crows decreased at a speed visible to the naked eye. Zack, Denny, and Calvin, who were next door, naturally noticed it as well, and rushed to the battlefield midway. There weren't many crows left. "All of you retreat," said Miranda. "Leave the rest to us." Zack and Calvin, who had just finished repairing their injuries, were brimming with energy. Raging flames, holy lights, and pitch-black fog. 3 attacks smashed into the remaining crows. This time, they didn't turn into thick smoke, but screamed and completely disappeared. Just when everyone took a breath and thought they had succeeded, the black gas above their heads started to slowly condense and take shape. They saw the monster above their heads, which had already partially condensed. "Quick, attack him!" Miranda shouted when she saw the great beast. Even if she didn't have any combat experience with this monster, she would do anything in her power to defeat it. Following Miranda's shout, flames, aurora, water blades, earth spikes, black arrows, and sword light all exploded in unison. A truly united front. The 6 attacks merged into a ball and turned into a bright flame, lighting up above. It had to be said that Miranda's command of this wave was very good. Yet, though the plan she devised was commendable, it was too late. A cloud of black smoke rapidly expanded until it covered the whole ceiling. 6 streams of smoke and fire seemed to have been cut off. A gigantic strange beast completely different from the other crows walked out of the black smoke. It was a completely new species, bearing the pitch-black wings of a crow, but bat-like wings. Its pair of sharp owl-like eyes glimmered, and fangs slowly protruded from its closed mouth like those of a vampire. If Charles were present, he would have recognized it at a glance as a jaybird. Miranda and the others raised their eyebrows in surprise and horror. However, they didn't even consider stopping. The next attack was condensed once again, ready to be unleashed. The medicinal jaybird cried out in a wretched voice. Its voice was truly demonic, and the eyes of some students with insufficient willpower glazed over immediately and began attacking their own people. "It's a spiritual spell superpower," cried Miranda. "I understand," Calvin shouted back. Calvin gathered the golden light in his body and chanted, "Light of Purification." From his body, a few holy lights flashed and landed on the bodies of the students who were being controlled. They instantly recovered. Flames, black keys, water blades, and other attacks fell from the jaybird's body once again. However, the jaybird didn't dodge. It allowed the attacks to land on its body, as if it was scratching an itch, and flapped its wings while staring at Zack and the others attacking it. It opened its mouth, and a ball of fire emerged from it. "You can spit fire?" said Zack, shocked. However, it strangely closed its mouth again and made a swallowing gesture. Then it burped in a very human-like manner. Zack frowned slightly. No wonder the ball of fire felt familiar. It was clearly the ball of fire that he had shot earlier. This guy actually ate it in one bite? What kind of monster was this? Unbeknownst to this group, medicinal jaybirds had bodies that were immune to the Tier 1 superpowers. This meant their bodies didn't have any weaknesses. Only powerful Esper abilities could completely crush them, by tearing the things to shreds. "Our attacks have no effect on it at all. What should we do?" Dale tried again, and found that it was indeed useless. He stopped attacking, facing Miranda and the others with an urgent look in his eyes. "Damn it," he said. "If Charles were here, he'd know the weakness of this monster." "Don't say that it's unrealistic. Think of another way," said Miranda. A terrified student who was bursting with intense hatred smashed the iron rod in his hand into the Jaybird above, using all the strength in his body. What? It works. That's right, physical attacks were very effective against Jaybirds. The strength of the Jaybird's body was actually not very high. However, that tiny bit of abrasion instantly vanished in the blink of an eye, as if it had never existed before. The Jaybird's red eyes only stared at that student, and it seemed like he had been drained of his soul essence and turned into a medicinal zombie. He walked toward the window and jumped out. No! They had no time to stop him as the Jaybird flapped its wings and knocked the people who tried to help to the ground. Then they watched helplessly as he jumped down from the window. After a moment, there was a dull sound. He had turned into a pile of minced meat that attracted the medicinal zombies. "I'll kill you!" screamed one student, who had lost all sense of rationality. His blood was boiling as he charged toward the Jaybird. "Don't be impulsive. Zick!" Miranda shouted. Dale raised his hand, and an earth wall appeared in front of Zick, stopping him. "You guys, don't stop me! I want to take revenge!" screamed Zick as tears streamed down his face like rain. Zick, who was usually very strong, seemed to have turned into another person at the moment. Miranda lowered her head slightly, her eyes filled with reluctance. "Is there a way?" she asked herself. "It sure doesn't look like it." However, the physical attack just now had clearly been effective. Although the monster recovered in an instant, the wound couldn't have been fake. "Those with weapons, use them," she commanded. "Those without weapons, use whatever can be used. Tables, chairs, anything." Immediately, she picked up a stool beside her and swung at the Jaybird above, connecting gloriously. Iron rod, wooden rod, iron shovel, broomstick, even a mop. All kinds of items came into play, directed at the Jaybird. "It's working," said Miranda, encouraging the others to keep at it. Although the Jaybird was extremely fast and dodged, there were still some abrasions. Just then, an extremely fast stool smashed into the creature's chest, and its pitch-black body turned blood red. The Jaybird screeched, evidently feeling pain. The person who had thrown the stool was Miranda. The throw had a trace of her power of thunder on it to increase its strength. The effect was profound. "Great!" shouted Miranda. "Quick, smash it!" Seeing the effect, students attacked it even faster. In the blink of an eye, everything that could be thrown was sent hurtling in the monster's direction. The Jaybird dodged repeatedly, not having the time to counterattack at all. Tony raised an entire tall table high, roaring as he rushed out from the crowd. As the head of the martial arts department, his physical fitness had always been on point. At this moment, his veins were bulging and his eyes were red as he jumped and smashed the big table into the Jaybird. The Jaybird was hit right on the spot that emitted a golden light in its eyes. Its body flew back, cracking the wall behind it with a brutal thud. "Awesome!" shouted the students. "Tony, good job!" Tony narrowed his eyes and shook his head. "Don't celebrate just yet. This monster can't die so easily." The Jaybird that had been smashed into the wall suddenly disappeared, only to appear again above the heads of the crowd. "Not good! Get out of the way!" But it was too late. The Jaybird, dripping with blood, was enraged and didn't care anymore. This group of people had actually injured it, making it feel pain, and it was furious. Its bloody mouth swallowed 3 people in rapid succession. It flew up high again, the injuries on its body healing at an extremely fast speed. "Students, run quickly. We can't defeat this monster," said Miranda, refusing to retreat herself. Some of the people who had long wanted to retreat heard this and immediately ran. The 2 people who ran the fastest were Michael Lee and Director Benson. They were clearly in the crowd, but at this moment seemed to be possessed by elite marathon runners. They shot to the front of the crowd, leading the way. The Jaybird flapped its wings and screamed at the top of its lungs. Its deep red eyes seemed to be looking at a group of lowly insects. Denny was very unhappy. He could awaken the dark ability of the undead element and was not a good person. Now that he had been regarded as a bug by a monster, he couldn't hold it in any longer. A few skeleton monsters that had suddenly emerged from the ground held blades and shields in their hands and charged forward under his command. However, with just a single dive from the Jaybird, the skeleton shattered into a pile of broken bones and scattered on the ground. Yet, the medicinal Jaybird's body didn't stop as it charged toward Denny. An earth wall instantly rose from the ground, but it was completely useless. The Jaybird opened its mouth and emitted a strange, terrible sound. The earth wall softened as a blue light flashed and the water screen shield appeared. It was still useless. The Jaybird's mouth seemed to be able to neutralize all defensive measures. It opened its bloody mouth to swallow Denny alive. It's really over this time around, he thought. Denny! Miranda cried as she helplessly watched the scene. The other medicinal awakens also felt their own powerlessness at the moment. Running was useless. If they ran, who would stop the monster? With the monster's speed, how could they possibly get away? Alice suddenly remembered Charles's bone spike, which he'd used as a weapon to suck the few black beetles dry. Maybe, just maybe. Thinking of this, Alice hurriedly ran to the door. Al! Miranda shouted halfway but gave up. What good would it do to stop Alice? Unwilling to give up, she condensed another sword beam and slashed the Jaybird, brimming with hatred. The Jaybird was enjoying the taste of its latest meal when the sword connected. However, it was still the same. The slash was completely useless, that the Jaybird didn't even see any abrasions. What kind of monster is this? Said Tony, looking at it with despair welling up in his heart. Outside the door, Alice appeared in front of them again with the bone spike that Charles used as a weapon in her hand. Miranda and the others were shocked. Alice, it really is yours. Quickly try attacking it. Tony, take it. Alice was self-aware and knew that she wasn't good at body techniques, so she threw the bone spike to Tony, who was shocked by the gesture. He hadn't awakened any superpower, so he was flattered at having suddenly gained this trust. However, he didn't have the time to be touched. He took the bone spike and spun around to attack the Jaybird. Although the Jaybird flew above his head, the room didn't have much space. There were still so many tables and chairs stacked on top of each other. He stepped on them and jumped high into the air, throwing the bone spikes with incredible power. Zack and the others below, including Miranda, had to admit that they couldn't have executed such a move. However, they wondered how the Jaybird could be hit so easily. The Jaybird dodged the incoming bone spikes and appeared in front of Tony in the blink of an eye. Insect, prepare to die, bellowed Tony. At this point, the Jaybird had sensed an aura that terrified it. The bone spike had the strength to kill it. The Jaybird trusted its intuition in this respect, so it didn't dare try to take it head-on, but hurriedly avoided it. However, it seemed the Jaybird had been fooled. There was a smile on Tony's face just as it felt a chill behind him. The bone spike stabbed into its body. The Jaybird whipped around, but didn't see anyone. The medicinal essence blood on its body surged madly into the bone spikes. It tried to flap its wings to throw the bone spikes out of its body. But unfortunately for the monster, the bone spikes wouldn't yield, having found its target. The Jaybird's wings quickly became numb and lost control. Phew! It scared me to death, Tony said, stepping back and patting his chest. Almost. He winked at Miranda and laughed. Miranda didn't respond to him at all. All of her attention was on the bone spike. If she lost control of it, she could find herself at the Jaybird's mercy at any time. Once they were freed by the Jaybird, it would be difficult for them to acquire a second chance like this. How could the Jaybird that she tricked once allow her to control the bone spike again? She still remembered how Charles had taught her back. The bone spikes continued to sink deeper into the Jaybird's body, crazily destroying it from top to bottom, going back and forth twice. The Jaybird was afraid its body would soon be destroyed. Although it had a strong recovery ability, the essence of its body was completely absorbed by the bone spikes, and it was impossible for it to recover without any energy left. Its turbid energy, essence blood, profound energy, and superpower were all absorbed by the bone spikes just like that. In the end, it turned into a flat layer of skin. It worked! One of the students yelled, pumping his fist. Miranda gasped for breath. The bone spike brought a black crystal core back to her body. She felt the aura on the crystal core just as everyone's expression changed. Tier 3 medicinal crystal core. So, the monster was a Tier 3 beast, and we actually killed it! Everyone was truly shocked, and even better, empowered. The bone spike that Charles used as a weapon was actually able to easily destroy a Tier 3 beast. They looked at the bone spike again, their eyes already showing a different expression. This slender bone spike was definitely not ordinary. "How are we splitting this medicinal crystal core?" asked Calvin. The cores of the medicinal lion-headed beasts, monster mosquitoes, and mantia nigris from before were numerous, and it was easy to split them. However, this time was different. This medicinal crystal core was different. Tier 3 medicinal crystal cores were enough to increase the medicinal spiritual strength's essence energy. There was even a chance of advancing to Tier 2. "I didn't exert much strength in the battle just now, so I won't participate," Zack said with great self-awareness. Dale nodded and said, "I won't participate either. You guys can share." After all, there was only one Tier 3 crystal core. The crystal core wasn't a pizza after all. It couldn't be divvied up so easily. Zack and Dale's meaning was obvious. The two of them chose to give up. Alice also shook her head and said, "I don't want it either." Immediately, everyone turned their eyes to Miranda, Tony, and Calvin. Although Tony had put in a lot of effort and played a crucial role in the process of killing the Jaybird, he wasn't unawakened. Naturally, he was ignored by everyone. So Miranda and Calvin looked at each other. Calvin said, "After all, I'm the only light power possessor, everyone's only support and the weakest in terms of combat power. But my position is still very important. So I want to prioritize strengthening my power as a light power possessor. That is..." Miranda didn't raise any objections to this, but she shook her head and said, "I also don't want to snatch this crystal core from you. It's just..." A gloomy look flashed across Calvin's face, and he asked, "Just what?" Miranda continued, "Charles isn't awake yet. If Charles wakes up, our only powerful combat strength is him. If not for his bone spear, we wouldn't have been able to defeat this Tier 3 beast. Therefore, I suggest we leave this crystal core for Charles." "Leave it for Charles?" Calvin said, frowning slightly. His outstretched hand was trembling. His life or death is still unknown. It's not certain if he'll even wake up. Even if he can wake up, what should we do until then? Those monsters outside won't stop attacking us. "I agree to leave it to Charles," Alice said. "Although Charles hasn't woken up yet, you should have noticed, Calvin. His vitality is becoming more and more obvious. Also, when I went to take his weapon, I saw Charles open his eyes." "He's awake?" Miranda hurriedly asked. Alice shook her head and continued, "He only glanced at me and then fainted." "I agree too," Zack said. "Charles is our strongest combat power after all. If he wakes up and has this crystal core to increase his strength, he'll reach a higher level. And with him leading us, we'll be able to escape this hellhole and maybe find safety." Dale saw that everyone agreed with Zack. Even if he agreed with Calvin's idea, it would only be 2 to 3. Moreover, with Miranda around, he couldn't stand against her. Immediately, he expressed his stance. "All right, everyone. We elected Miranda for a reason. Let's do as she says and stop bickering about it." Calvin's expression turned ugly, but due to the current situation, he could only nod his head in agreement. Just as they finished the discussion, the students who ran away came back under Michael Lee's lead. "Quickly save us! Miss Miranda!" Miranda and the others turned to see a few medicinal zombies, as well as some medicinal black beetles, chasing closely behind them. "Where's that crow monster?" asked Michael Lee cautiously, eyes darting around the chamber. Judging from his steps, it was obvious that he was ready to run away yet again. "He's been killed," Miranda said lightly. With a flash of sword light, the brain matter of a zombie immediately exploded. They, who already had experience fighting enemies, immediately rushed forward, and each of them killed a zombie in a single move. After a few bright flashes of light, the monsters fell to the ground one after another, dead. The crystal cores were also dug out of them. "There are zombies everywhere outside," said one student. "Not only are there zombies either, there are also all kinds of monsters and bugs. We're dead for sure." The boy didn't have any hope even when he saw Miranda and the others' divine might. "It's impossible. We're dead," he muttered, while walking toward the window. This person was dressed in branded clothes, and his skin was soft and tender. He'd really wanted to be a film star, and from the way he dressed, it seemed like his family was well off. "It's Sterling Knight." A classmate recognized him. He used to be a rich kid, so high-spirited and confident. He was rich and handsome, and had a lot of girls in school. But now, he was in such a miserable state. Perhaps he could have played an action hero, but he wasn't of much use in this new landscape of death and destruction. He didn't even dare to breathe. He just followed everyone and ran away muddle-headed, like a walking corpse. Seeing so many people die at this point, he was already somewhat numb to it. His mind, which had been ravaged, no longer wanted to continue like this. He muttered to himself and walked toward the place where the classmate had jumped out of the window. "No! Sterling, don't jump! Live! There's always hope!" He ignored the shouts of the students behind him and without any hesitation, jumped down. After a long time, a dull thud came from downstairs. "Dale, why didn't you stop him?" Dale didn't stop Sterling because Miranda raised her hand to stop him. He looked at Miranda with confusion in his eyes. "He no longer has the courage to live, but we have to live. Food is in short supply now." It was only then that Dale stopped accumulating strength and stopped trying to save him. Miranda had made the decision, and he couldn't bear it. It shouldn't be like this. Even Miranda felt strange. How did she become like this? Seeing a life disappear from her eyes and refusing to move. Maybe they were all becoming monsters after all. The cruelty of the end of the world had just begun. The strong survived and the weak were eliminated. The most primitive natural law had already begun to manifest itself. Either one ate the beast or was eaten by the beast. There was no other way to go. These monsters had no reason, only a desire to feed. Therefore, there was no turning back. Indeed, there were people like Sterling who chose to give up, flee, and end their own lives in the face of this nightmare. In the face of the horrors that now existed, it was hard not to appreciate the logic of suicide. Only then would one need greater courage to face all of the unknown and terrifying things. Miranda looked at the window, lost in thought. She had hardly had time to feel sad for a moment before another group of strange beasts came charging at her from outside the window. There were monster mosquitoes, mantia nigras, and other densely packed monsters that she couldn't recognize at all. Just like the white mantises that Charles encountered at the school gate, these things were completely green and looked like flies, their eyes emitting a horrifying green light. They flew out of the window at an alarming speed, clearly bent on destruction. There was also the large hole that Charles had created. At the stairs, even though the zombie had lost an arm and a leg, it was still grinning and screaming at them. When these monsters smelled their scent, they couldn't stop. The killing never stopped. There was only the collision of flesh and blade. Miserable screams lingered in the air, and some people who had already given up all hope howled like wolves. They rushed into the zombie group without any resistance, allowing the creatures to devour them. Tears streamed down their faces as they were torn apart, but at least their suffering was over. The sorrowful aura that had spread from Mitchell White to the rest of the students didn't dissipate for a long time. Miranda hacked into the body of the monster mosquito in front of her and shouted with a frown, "If anyone dares to take the initiative to die, I will kill him first." This kind of action could only increase the trouble for those who wanted to live, because they would lose all reason and turn into new zombies. As Miranda spoke, sword light cut through the crowd and rushed toward a student who was pouncing on the zombie group. The student fell to the ground an instant later, and this scene left everyone stunned. In the end, only a small number of people were infected by Sterling. The others all wanted to live and would do whatever they had to. How could they give up so easily? In a corner, Calvin shook off the few monsters in front of him as his body shone with golden light. A circular wave rolled away from the crowd, leaving everyone speechless. They felt a great power emerging from their bodies, and their desire to survive grew stronger still. Kill! They want our lives, and we want their lives. Kill! Only by raising the butcher's knife could they resist the butcher's knife. Encouraged, they grabbed whatever might be used as a weapon and started attacking the zombies. A medicinal zombie's skull was smashed by their fierce attacks. Good. The morale was a little stronger. For a moment, the situation remained a stalemate. They were trapped between the corridor and classroom by the monsters. They killed the ones who rushed forward, but another wave always followed. Very quickly, many of them began to feel tired, exhausted. It was impossible to go on this way. Miranda and the other paranormals also began to fight sporadically. When a monster mosquito rushed over, it grabbed an opening in Miranda's back and stabbed her. Fortunately, Mason Hunt, who was helping to defend everyone on the battlefield, had been paying attention to the overall situation. Now at Miranda's side, he was ready to act. Bursts of earth protruded and saved Miranda. Miranda threw him a grateful look, not having time to say anything. She charged toward the Mantia Nigra that rushed up again. There was always a blue light flashing from Alice's body. The water screen shield protected her surroundings. Seeing that Miranda was injured, the blue light flashed and condensed behind Miranda, helping to expel the poison. With this, they persisted. They fought back the horde for an entire hour. Only then did the monsters retreat. The bugs and the corpses fell back together. Those who had been holding on cried tears of joy. We stopped them! We survived again! They lay on the ground in dejection. They no longer cared about the stench and blood on the ground. Their bodies were sticky, and they didn't care at all. They simply gasped for breath. Although everyone was alive, they were all heavily injured. They had broken limbs and short legs. Fortunately, Calvin and Alice were still there to treat their wounds. Miranda looked at the receding bug horde and couldn't relax. A wave of worry rose within her. This time, they'd resisted them. But what about next time? There were still so many of these monsters. Charles, she thought. Charles, why aren't you awake yet? We can't hold on any longer. She turned around to look at everyone. Frowning, she said, "It's still not the time to rest. Stand up." Everyone was shocked, but sat up and looked at her. She continued, "These corpses will rot very soon. Hurry up and clean them up. We have to deal with the aftermath." She looked at Zach, her meaning very clear. Zach was lying on the ground when he saw Miranda's sharp eyes and shivered. Why was this gentle, sexy female teacher so murderous now? Her aura was incredibly potent. Zach immediately stood up and nodded to show that he understood. He pulled together some students who still had the strength and arranged for them to go. He forcefully supported himself with the spiritual strength and burned the corpses of the bugs and medicinal zombies to ashes. In the blink of an eye, he saw those male students take a pipe from the toilet tap. Although this water couldn't be drunk, it was still very useful for washing the ground. The ashes flowed downstairs under the wash. Then Calvin and Alice collected the zombies of the bugs and crystal cores. A few awakened sat beside Charles. They looked at the hundreds of purified crystal cores and started to scatter. "I only need 20 spiritual strengths to recover. You can divide the rest among yourselves." Miranda didn't ask for much. She chose 10 crystal cores, 2 of them at the second step, and 8 at the first step. Then she sat to the side and began to absorb them. This was her life now. Seeing this, Mason also took 20 pills and moved to the side. There were still nearly 100 pills left. Calvin smiled and said, "All right, I won't stand on ceremony. Alice and I need Zach to be half a step closer to each other. After all, we need to use Charles to treat Charles." Alice immediately understood Miranda and Mason's good intentions. The two of them wanted Charles to wake up earlier. 10 minutes later, several rays of light flashed across the room sporadically, and everyone shared the results of their absorption. "I advanced! Me too!" The 100 zombies that Charles had destroyed greatly increased the number of crystal cores they had just awakened. Now, there was a huge increase in the number of spiritual strengths they had consumed. Although it was harmful to their bodies, the amount of spiritual strength they had recovered would increase by a large margin. As the saying goes, one cannot break without breaking. They had improved as a result, and they had become increasingly familiar with the control of thunder power essence of heaven and earths. Hence, breaking through was also within reason. After reporting each other's cultivation realms, everyone had an idea. Miranda had reached Tier 2 and Tier 4. Alice had reached Tiers 1 and 2. Calvin had reached 2 and 3. Dale had reached the Second Order and 5th Realm. As for Zack, he didn't know what was going on either. Perhaps it was his talent. He had already reached Tier 2 and Tier 9 and was only one step away from breaking through to Tier 3. "Miss Miranda," said Calvin, "I think this Tier 3 medicinal crystal core should be given to Zack to eat. Who knows, he might break through to Tier 3. It's only a matter of time before we slaughter our way out of the encirclement." Miranda thought for a few seconds, and nodded. "I agree. If Zack breaks through to the 3rd step, there will be a new flame. Hell Karma Fire. Even if we encounter that medicinal jaybird again, we'll still have the strength to fight." "Then it's decided." Everyone exchanged a few words and arranged for the Tier 3 medicinal crystal core to be given to Zack. Even if Zack still had the heart to keep it for Charles, considering the actual situation at hand, he accepted everyone's arrangements and absorbed the medicinal crystal core on the spot. Unfortunately, the breakthrough that everyone imagined didn't come to pass. Everyone's faces revealed looks of disappointment. Zack opened his eyes and saw everyone's faces. He scratched his head and said awkwardly, "I can feel that I'm just one step away. As long as I take a small step forward, I'll be able to break through." Charles probably knew that the crystal core that he had left for himself had been swallowed by Zack, so he coughed in time. "Charles? You're awake now." "Charles!" said Wesley Stephen. Everyone looked at Charles. However, Charles still lay on the ground with his eyes closed. Charles was awake and really wanted to respond to everyone's shouts, but his body refused to listen to him. He could feel his body, but his brain couldn't issue any orders. To be exact, his body wouldn't carry out any commands issued by his brain. His body rebelled. However, Charles had a surprising discovery. The origin energy in his body had reached 9 strands. He recalled his sudden outburst earlier, realizing that it was at that moment his origin energy broke through to 9 strands. The inner demon that was triggered allowed Charles to activate his potential, raising his strength by several times in a single breath. If one were to convert it into the realm of a paranormal, Charles's current realm was First Order and 9th Realm. It could be said that he was the lowest among the people present. However, in terms of combat strength, Zack, who didn't have a Tier 3 fire attribute, was no match for Charles. This wasn't because of Charles's identity as a warrior, but because the mysterious ancient book brought Charles great combat strength. The extract amulet was just the tip of the iceberg in the ancient book. Now that he had 9 strands of origin energy, he could already display even more powerful moves in the ancient book. Essence Blood Summoning. Using the Essence Blood as a sacrifice, and supplementing it with other things like the Cadaver Race's Worm Clan's medicinal crystal cores, he summoned powerful demons from another dimension to help him. The effect was the same as the summoning ability. However, the difference was that Charles's sacrifice and the summoning ability were much stronger than the summoning ability. For example, the resurrection of Denny's undead body was equivalent to the summoning of a random soldier. It didn't exist in Charles's hands, but he had called for it. At the very least, it was a Knight of the Undead. "All right, it's decided then," said Miranda. "Alice, you stay and protect Charles while I lead everyone to explore the path first." Charles was deep in thought for a moment. Miranda had already finished discussing with everyone. Alice would guard Charles, while the others would bring some students to find some food and clean water. Along the way, they would also need to go to the dormitory building to find some thick clothes and roll up some bedding. After all, sleeping on the floor every day was unbearable, even for the toughest of these students. The temperature outside was as cold as winter, but everyone was still wearing summer clothes. If they didn't have healing abilities, some people would have been frozen. Miranda brought Zach, Dale, Calvin, and some of her classmates who still had energy left, and headed out of the building. Under Alice's warm treatment, Charles fell into a deep sleep for a while, but when he woke up again, he still couldn't move. However, he could gently wiggle his fingers. Charles suddenly felt that something wasn't right. His sixth sense told him that something must have happened. Footsteps could be heard from outside. "Hurry up," said a strange voice. "Be quiet," hissed another. "It will be bad if someone else finds out." "Shh." Two men walked toward Charles. "Are you sure you can get his power by killing him?" "You can try." "That Denny Peters is dead, but Tony has become a medicinal awakened like Denny. He has so many skeleton soldiers with just a wave of his hand. How can people not envy him? How can one survive without a superpower? Principal Lee is wise," Benson exclaimed. "Don't just stand there. Let's do it." Charles could already tell whose voice it was. One voice belonged to Michael Lee, and the other to Director Benson. No surprise, they wanted to kill him. "It's over," thought Charles, completely defenseless. Must I really die at the hands of these two? No, he couldn't accept that no matter what. He tried his best to control his body, trying to move, but there was still no response. "Ah!" Director Benson let out a strange cry and took a few steps back. "Shh! Lower your voice!" Michael Lee's face was twisted. He looked at Director Benson with disdain and shouted in a low voice, "What a piece of trash!" As he said that, he turned around, wanting to do it himself. But Charles raised his hand. "Ah!" Like Director Benson, he was so scared that he retreated. His face was livid, and with a plop, he knelt on the ground and hurriedly said, "Charles, don't misunderstand. We were worried about you, so we came to see your body. Since you've already recovered, then we'll... Principal." Director Benson tugged at the corner of his shirt and said in a low voice, "He's not awake." Charles used all his strength to raise his arm, but he could only lift it up and put it down. He couldn't open his eyes, as it felt like there was a mountain pressing down on his eyelids. Charles still tried his best to regain mobility. Mr. Lee saw Charles's movements clearly. He raised his head and landed on the ground multiple times. The panic was swept away, and in his embarrassment and anger, he sneered ferociously and said fiercely, "I know, I'm performing a ceremony to the person who is about to die. Give me the dagger." Principal Lee took the dagger from Director Benson's hand and slowly approached Charles. He raised the dagger high up and immediately stabbed down. No more than a dinging sound followed. The blood that Director Benson had imagined splashing everywhere didn't follow. Only a strange sound. Charles secretly breathed a sigh of relief and thought to himself, "Good." At this critical moment, he used his hands, which had recovered, to quietly draw an extract amulet. It wasn't a powerful extract amulet, just a quick fix. Even so, though, it was more than enough to defend against Principal Lee's attack. Lee felt as if he had stabbed an iron plate. Was Charles's body actually so hard? He was curious. He had fought with zombies before, but even zombies were not as hard as Charles, right? Could it be that this guy was no longer human? Principal Lee thought to himself. He wanted to find out if Charles was still breathing. He was jealous and suspected that Charles had already turned into a zombie, or harnessed their powers somehow. When he was just an inch away from Charles's nose, a dazzling light suddenly appeared between his fingers, lighting up the somewhat dark room. Charles sneered in his heart. He had come at the right time. The red light slipped into Principal Lee's body from his fingertip like human dialysis. It lit up all of his internal organs and bones, giving off a strange red light. Charles chanted, "Offer." A 5-elemental spell array appeared under Principal Lee's feet. Each corner of the spell array gave off a different color: red, orange, yellow, blue, and purple. Principal Lee was scared, really scared. He lost control of his body and wanted to beg for mercy. He wanted to beg Charles to let him go, but he couldn't open his mouth. Director Benson looked at Principal Lee's eyes and saw the message. He hurriedly shouted, "Someone come here! Someone hurry! Charles has killed someone!" Director Benson's shout was loud and resounded across the entire floor. The sound of footsteps ensued. The first to arrive was Tony, and behind him was Alice. Tony and Alice were first shocked and then overjoyed. Charles? He woke up? Charles was awake! When the two saw the scene, they immediately felt a little strange. Where did Charles wake up from? Wasn't he still lying there motionless? Furthermore, Director Benson and Principal Lee, what was going on between them? What's going on? I don't know, said Principal Lee. We just came to see Charles. Who knew that the moment we touched Charles, the principal would end up like this? Principal Lee's body was glowing red. The colorful spell array under his feet was still shining. But what was with the dagger on Principal Lee's hand? Alice's expression changed, and she cast Benson a severe look. She was smart, so how could she not know what had happened? You two really don't know what's going on. Alice's tone made a chill run down Tony's spine as the cold air rushed into his body. This Principal Lee, trying to kill me. I trapped you with my essence blood. Charles tried his best to regain control of his throat. He didn't open his mouth, but slowly said these words. His voice was a little hoarse and very slow. It seemed like he took a lot of effort to get this sentence out. What? Principal Lee, you actually did such a thing? Tony said angrily. Alice's expression turned icy. She stared at Director Benson and Principal Lee and said, No wonder Lara insisted on calling me over. So, it was the two of you. No, don't misunderstand. We really didn't mean that. You didn't mean that? Tony walked over and took the dagger from Principal Lee. What do you mean? He asked. Director Benson couldn't explain at this moment. With the certification material and the person involved, there was no room to argue when he was caught red-handed. He immediately felt his head heating up. Let's go all out. I'll fight it out with you, he said as he rushed toward Charles, who was lying on the ground. However, Tony wouldn't do as he wished. Director Benson's physique was no match for Tony. He didn't have the time to defend himself and was sent flying 20 feet away by Tony's kick. Charles, how should we deal with this scumbag Lee here? Tony frowned. No, we don't need to worry about him. He's trapped by me. He's a sacrifice. All of you will see what happens to him soon, Charles said slowly and hoarsely. Offering? Is it a summoning ceremony? Tony had just become a necromancer, so he was familiar with the word sacrifice. That's right. Tony nodded and walked over to Director Benson. He tied his hands and feet up and sat next to Charles. Then he looked at the spell array curiously with Alice. They also knew about summoning rituals. Alice could summon water elemental guards now, and Tony could also summon skeleton soldiers. However, their summoning was not like Charles's. The spell array only released its aura, and this somewhat frightened them. What kind of monster was it trying to summon? Charles, what level is your combat strength? Tony smacked his lips and asked with envy. Alice lowered her head and looked at Charles, waiting for his answer. I should be counted as tier 9, Charles said honestly. You're a 9? Shouted the other. You killed a lion-headed beast with one punch, said Tony. You even created a large hole in the entire building, and you're telling me that you're a tier only a 9? Tony, who had just advanced to the Awakened Realm, also had tier 1 and tier 6 strength. He wasn't far from tier 9 himself, and he knew what kind of combat strength he would enjoy after reaching the 9th realm. No way, Charles. We're all on the same side. To be honest, Tony raised his eyebrows. Charles was really speechless. He sincerely said, If you don't believe me, you can check my power of thunder. Tony and Alice immediately looked at each other when they heard that. They reached out and touched Charles's body. Alice. Tony. It's really First Order and Ninth Order Thunder Power Essence, said Alice with a gasp. How is this possible? Asked Tony. No matter how doubtful the two of them were, the origin energy flowing through their bodies couldn't fool the others. Most importantly, Charles was not unawakened. There was no spiritual essence energy, and this deeply confused the two of them. They really wanted Charles to give them an answer. It's a good show. Don't just stand there. Charles's voice had returned to normal. The two of them immediately looked at Principal Lee. They saw a pitch-black fog emerging from the bottom of the spell array. It was a terrifying aura, and even more terrifying than the jaybird they had come into contact with before. The two of them shivered in fear. When they remembered that this was summoned by Charles, however, they were no longer afraid. They continued to look at it with anticipation in their eyes. The thick fog wrapped around Principal Lee, and a bloody mouth appeared from within it. The others were blown away. This is a creature from hell? Its aura is definitely not like that of a living creature. The awakened superpower knowledge had a description of the known world and the underworld, including hell. There, even many powerful demons couldn't survive. Hellfire was burning all the time, and was called Hell Karma Fire. Even the jaybird from before would probably touch the Hell Karma Fire and would become nourishment for it. For this reason, the monsters that lived in hell were all living in hell. There was an aura that was different from the upper space of Earth. It had a warm current under the pressure that pressed the hearts of people, as if it wanted to burn them to ashes. Not to mention the interior of the Hell Karma Fire. There was even a more terrifying medicinal hell genuine fire. Just thinking about it caused both of them to feel a chill down their spines. What kind of monster was this? The bloody mouth bit off Principal Lee's lower body, quickly chewed, and then took another bite. Michael Lee's expression became twisted as he watched his body being eaten in extreme pain. In the end, he was swallowed by the skull. The figure of the monster was also revealed. It had 3 heads, and each one bore a bloody mouth and sharp fangs. Its body was covered in flames, and the temperature of the entire room increased by a few degrees. In an instant, winter came to a scorching summer, and its long snake-like tail was wagging behind it. It saves a lot of heat, Charles said with a smile. Alice and Tony were so shocked that they couldn't say anything. They only came back to their senses after Charles teased them. 3. 3-headed dog of hell. That's right. I also didn't expect that the first time I summoned it. I actually summoned the Cerberus. I'm a little surprised. Charles was telling the truth. He was thinking about it. How had this monster come out in the first place? Staying in hell was boring. I suddenly felt the call of an old friend. How could I not come? Cerberus spoke in English, and his voice was calm and strong. He continued, "Don't be surprised. This ceremony should have been an undead. I've beaten that guy back." Old friend? Tony and Alice didn't understand what was going on. Oh, Charles thought for a moment. Didn't he come back to life? And had he summoned a Cerberus in his previous life? It seemed like there had been other creatures in hell, and this watchdog, he had never summoned it before, right? The Cerberus continued, "Oh, Master's aura. How did it become so weak? Furthermore, it's unfamiliar." "You must have mistaken me for someone else, right?" Charles said helplessly. Yes. The Cerberus realized something was wrong and suddenly said, "No, you're not my lord. Who are you? How can you have the Master's aura?" "I'm Charles." Charles roughly understood what was going on. It was probably the author of the ancient book. The senior who had left behind this mysterious technique could even be called master. He was the true master of this watchdog. He had practiced this cultivation technique, which was why this watchdog had mistakenly thought that he was that person. How is that possible? My loyalty imprint has already been carved onto your body. You are my lord? The Cerberus was clearly unhappy as it said, "Such a weak bug is actually my lord?" You. The Cerberus angrily shouted, You are not worthy to be my lord." "Let's not worry about whether I'm worthy or not. Well, can I trouble you to help me recover my body? I can't move right now. It's very uncomfortable," Charles said. The Cerberus shook its 3 heads and said, "I only know how to destroy. I don't do repairs." "Damn it," roared Charles. His ritual was to summon a necromancer. A necromancer might be weaker than this hound, but undead great mages knew powerful spells, and it would be easy for him to heal himself and restore his mobility. Now it had all been destroyed by the Cerberus. Cerberus was a little stunned. This was the first time it had been looked down upon by someone ever since it was born, and it was highly disconcerting. As an emissary of hell, it possessed a powerful flame and an extremely destructive breath. Now, it had actually been looked down upon. I haven't been here for a minute yet, and you're already starting to look down on me? Just now you said that I'm not worthy of being its master. Sorry to have bothered you. Since we don't like each other, we won't see each other again. After saying that, the Cerberus drilled into the ground. This was the meaning of leaving. I won't send you off, Charles replied indifferently. The Cerberus was also straightforward. It left as it pleased. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. Charles turned toward Alice and Tony. There will always be an accident during the summoning ceremony. Charles felt the two speechless and laughed repeatedly. Alice thought about it and said, Charles, just now, you said that there's a healing spell that can help you regain mobility. Then, what kind of healing power do you need? Charles shook his head and said, It's useless. My body isn't injured. I lost my mobility because my body has gained too much energy. I can only rely on myself to slowly recover. Then just now you... Charles smiled and said, That guy said I don't deserve to be its master, as if I would want a saboteur to be my subordinate even if he has great strength. Charles continued, However, it's true that I'm unable to control its movements. Is that why you said that? That's right. Although the Cerberus has 3 heads, it's lacking in the brains department. Picking up on Tony's confusion, Alice jumped in. The thing has simply met too many monsters in hell. It's no surprise that it's gotten judgmental throughout the eons. The Doomsday Emissary Lucius, Flame Devil King Daros, Dark Shadow Devil King Nevinmore, Magma Watcher Tiang Qiang, Lord of the Void Enigmatic, Undead Wyvern Vesagi. I only know a few of them at the moment. The stories about hell are too long, and I don't have time to finish reading them, Alice honestly replied. I've never heard any of the names you said, Tony said, scratching his head. After all, he had just awakened. You should take a good look at the knowledge. After all, necromancy can eventually become a dark archmage. It is very possible to summon those hell monsters in the future. Wait, Tony? Tony, you've awakened necromancy? Charles asked in surprise. Yes, I just awakened it, Tony replied proudly. After all, being able to become an awakened meant that 1 in 10,000 was the chosen one. How did Denny die? Charles felt a sense of sadness in his heart. Although he was not familiar with Denny, he had suddenly found out that he was dead. As an awakened, he was dead. How could an ordinary person deal with all of this? An ordinary person like his sister? What the hell was going on? Almost a day had already passed. Denny, he died at the hands of a Tier 3 Jaybird. Charles came to a sudden realization at this moment. That was a powerful body, which possessed an immunity to low-grade magic techniques. In his previous life, when he was in the Demon Hunter Squad, he had encountered a medicinal Jaybird that had already grown to the 7th level of the 6th rank realm. The medicinal Jaybirds of a rank 5 fire awakened in the squad couldn't even harm its body. After Tony sighed, he immediately said, However, we have avenged him. The medicinal Jaybird was killed by us. Hopefully Denny's spirit in heaven will be able to rest in peace. He's already at peace, Charles said calmly. After he died, you had his special ability, and even inherited half of his mental energy. This is clear proof. Charles, you mean that the superpower in my body was given to me by Denny? Tony asked, shocked. Charles nodded and said, I'm just saying that there's a possibility. After all, there are only 3 possibilities for the inheritance of the superpower. Inheritance of superpowers? 3 possibilities? This was the first time Alice and Tony had heard of this. The knowledge does not awaken, so it's not strange that you don't know, Charles said. One of the three possibilities, the man with the power to, gives his power to the man he sees before his death, at the last moment when his soul is gone. Because it was possible that if the person himself was also unawakened, conflict would arise. This was one of the reasons why he had failed. Another reason was that this person's talent was extremely poor. Even if he received the inheritance, he wouldn't be able to awaken the mental energy hidden within his body. Alice and Tony were listening attentively. However, when they saw that Charles had stopped, they hurriedly asked, "What about the other two possibilities?" "The other two? What happened to you doesn't involve those two possibilities." "Forget it," said Charles, smiling. Then, immediately changing the topic, he asked, "By the way, how did you kill that jaybird?" Charles was quite curious about how they'd gotten out of that situation. Could it be that the others had already reached the 3rd grade? "Speaking of this, Charles, what kind of terrifying thing is this bone spike that you used as a weapon?" "It's the bone spike that we used to kill the medicinal jaybird." "Bone spike?" Charles was stunned for a moment, then immediately laughed and asked, "To think that you could think of it? But it's also true that you don't have Tier 3 magic abilities and want to kill the jaybird. There are indeed some other methods." Charles smiled and then began to explain. "This bone spike is actually the essence of the bloody corpse. The knowledge you have awakened should be related to the records of the bloody corpse, right? As for the bloody corpse, this type of monster, after it dies with resentment and unwillingness to die, the resentment, baleful aura, and corpse energy will gather on its back, forming an undying bone ridge. Even 10,000 of them might explode. I killed that medicinal bloody corpse earlier, and then he exploded. To be honest, it was quite the show." Charles had killed quite a number of bloody corpses in his previous life, and there were very few that could form a spine. In fact, there wasn't a single one of them. Therefore, he actually didn't know much about the bone ridges of bloody corpses, as this was also his first time using them. Previously, he'd only heard that although the grade of the bone spine wasn't high, it was very difficult to fuse with origin energy, as it could evolve. When it corroded the flesh, the process of absorption was rapid. Regardless of whether it was medicinal essence blood, or negative effects of corpse energy, infernal energy, or poisonous gas, it welcomed them all. The more it absorbed, the sharper and harder it became. Moreover, the most important thing was that it could be refined and forged into its own weapon. This way, even a weapon could have the same effect. This thing could be considered a treasure. "Probably. This is the god of Europe," said Tony, letting out a long sigh. Charles was speechless. This was the first time he'd been envied by others, and he raised his head in surprise. His head had already regained control, and he could feel that his body would be soon to follow. He turned his head and saw Director Benson shivering in the corner. His eyes had lost all of their focus. The appearance of the 3-headed monster that had eaten Principal Lee had been terrifying, and its very aura had thrown him into deep despair. "This guy can't die just like that. We can't give him a quick death. Throw him down and let the zombies take care of him. We'll use everything we have to kill him. Killing him will only dirty our hands," Charles said. Tony and Alice naturally didn't have any objections. After all, Charles was the one who'd been targeted. If they wanted to kill Charles, then they naturally had to be prepared to be killed by Charles. Don't. Just kill me. I don't want to be eaten by monsters. I don't want to be eaten by monsters," Director Benson shouted. However, there was nothing he could do but watch Tony pick him up. Tony's strength was amazing. He picked up Director Benson, who weighed more than 200 pounds, effortlessly. He walked quickly and threw him down from the window. Soon a muffled sound came from downstairs. They saw a few zombies appear to investigate the sound, and they soon heard muffled Director Benson's miserable screams. Tony hissed and sat back down to ask Charles about the control of his power of thunder and some other experiences. Not long after, though, a few students hurried in. One of the female students' clothes were completely tattered. She panted and said, Quick! Someone come! Blake Banks is trying to bully Lara." "It's Lara again," Alice frowned. The reason Principal Lee and Director Benson were able to sneak in was because she was forcefully dragged away by Lara. This gave them an opportunity to sneak in. She was now suspicious of Lara. Was she on the same side as Principal Lee and the others? Did that mean she couldn't come up with another plan? Tony immediately stood up. "Quick, lead the way." Charles could tell that Alice was worried. He looked up and said, "You don't have to worry about me. An ordinary person can't do anything to me. Don't worry." Alice remembered that powerful Cerberus and immediately nodded. Then she followed in Tony's footsteps. Charles turned his head to take a look inside. He always felt that Alice cared very little about him. That kind of feeling. Charles could clearly feel that it was a little similar. Dependence. It could even be said that it was loyalty. In this apocalyptic environment, it wasn't a good thing to have a strong attachment to others. This could lead to weakness, and weakness could only lead to death. The girls brought them to the bathroom. A wave of shouting came from the women's bathroom. Alice and Tony rushed in without hesitation. Inside, they saw Blake pressing Lara to the ground. One hand covered her mouth, while the other tried to tear her clothes apart. Tony was furious. He shouted and rushed forward. Blake was kicked up and flew a few yards away. "Blake, how could you do such a thing?" snapped Tony, sounding angry and helpless. He recognized Blake from before when they had played basketball together. He was a straightforward person, and they'd always had a good relationship. Who would have thought he was actually capable of such evil? Blake spat out a mouthful of blood and said to Tony, "Tony, don't pretend to be a hero here. We're all men. Don't you want to? Who the hell is going to die without a little fun? Why do you care about this? Tony, why don't we come together?" Tony didn't expect Blake to say what he was thinking without even explaining. He even invited him to join in. Tony immediately became furious and sent another kick over. Alice was even more furious. 4 or 5 water blades had already appeared and pierced into Blake's chest with extreme speed. Alice panted heavily as she stared at Blake, who had died on the spot. She swallowed, because even though she had killed zombies before, they weren't people. This time, she really did kill someone. Killing someone intentionally and being forced to do so were 2 completely different levels. However, she still had killed in the end. She closed her eyes and recalled Charles's actions on the sports field. At that time, when she met Director Benson and Principal Lee. And she suddenly understood. This world, the world where the mask of moral hypocrisy was torn apart, it had already fallen. It was no longer warm and tender. It wasn't just medicinal zombies. It wasn't just bugs anymore. There were also people, many people, capable of evil.